Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we sift through some pretty dense research to pull out the insights that really matter, the ones you can maybe even use.
That's the goal.
And today, we're diving headfirst into something that's, well, it's changing everything, isn't it? Large language models, LLMs.
Yep. ChatGPT, things like that.
Exactly. You see them everywhere now. They're in how we work, how we play, and maybe most importantly, how we learn.
It's hard to miss.
And, the benefits seem pretty dazzling right off the bat. I mean, personalized learning, that adapts to you.
Instant feedback, yeah. Access to just vast amounts of information.
It feels like it's democratizing knowledge in a way.
Right.
Like this quiet revolution happening on our screens.
Oh, the power is absolutely undeniable. These tools are incredibly sophisticated, no question. And their adoption, it's really kicked off a new era.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There often is with big shifts like this. It's a complex duality, as you said, huge advantages, huge efficiencies, but also, well, new questions arise.
Especially about thinking, right?
Right.
About cognitive development.
Precisely. And the long-term impact on our intellectual abilities. Researchers are now seriously looking into this idea of cognitive debt.
Cognitive debt, okay.
And that's really a central theme for us today, I think.
It absolutely is. And that idea, cognitive debt, that's what we're here to unpack. But, and this is crucial, we want to reframe it a bit.
Okay.
Our mission here isn't just to wave a red flag about LLMs, say, beware the robots or something.
Right. Not about fear-mongering.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Instead, we're going to dissect this really groundbreaking study from MIT. It's titled, perfectly I think, Your Brain on ChatGPT.
I saw that one, yeah. Really interesting work.
It's more than just cool neuroscience, though. We see it as this powerful, data-driven case for something critical we need in education now.
Which is?
We're calling it a need for modern apprenticeship.
Modern apprenticeship. I like that framing. Explain that.
Well, think of the LLM as this incredibly sophisticated tool, right? Like the most advanced gadget a master craftsman could have.
Okay, yeah. Capable of amazing things.
Exactly. But what this MIT study shows, really rigorously, is the danger of just handing that super tool to an apprentice.
Without the training wheels, essentially. Without the foundational skills.
Without the mentorship, before they've built up their own cognitive muscle,
Okay. So the study highlights the risk of using the tool before you have the underlying craft.
Precisely. And the path forward, based on this data, isn't about fearing the tool. It's about developing the pedagogy, the teaching method for it.
Creating that modern apprenticeship, as you said. Teaching people how to use this powerful tool effectively.
But critically, when to use it. It's about prioritizing the fundamentals first.
Building the foundation.
Yeah, teaching critical thinking, real writing skills, building that cognitive architecture for independent reasoning. You have to build the mental house first.
Before you bring in the fancy smart home tech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Only once that solid structure is there, then you introduce the LLM.
Not as a crutch that just does the thinking for you.
But as a partner. A collaborator, something that amplifies your ability, doesn't replace it.
Okay, that's a key distinction. Amplifier, not replacement.
And this really gets to the core takeaway we want you to hold on to, even before we get into all the study details.
Okay, lay it on us.
This fear of cognitive debt, the idea that using AI makes our brains weaker.
Yeah.
It's only really a danger, it seems, in an educational vacuum.
Meaning, if we just throw the tools out there with no guidance.
Exactly. No thoughtful instruction, no focus on building those foundational skills first. So if we can reframe this
From risk and restriction.
to cultivation and craftsmanship, then the whole debate shifts, doesn't it?
Yeah, it moves from how do we limit this threat to
how do we best cultivate a new generation of, master craftsmen, people ready to build the future with these incredibly powerful tools.
training the user, not just banning the tool. That's powerful.
So with that reframing set, let's really unpack this study. Let's see what it tells us about how we learn, how we think, and maybe how we should teach.
All right, let's get into it.
So, setting the stage scientifically, this MIT study was pretty meticulous. They recruited 54 people,
Okay.
aged 18 to 39, so right in that prime academic and early career bracket,
Makes sense. Students, young professionals.
pulled from major Boston universities, MIT, Wellesley, Harvard, Tufts, Northeastern. So a bright bunch.
Diverse pool, good universities. And balanced for age and gender, you mentioned.
Yep, carefully balanced. They really tried to make it a robust group.
Good start. And how did they peek inside their heads, so to speak?
That's where it gets really cool. They used electroencephalography, EEG.
Ah, the cap with all the electrodes.
Exactly. Think of it like listening in on the brain's electrical chatter. It's not mind reading,
No, definitely not.
but it shows brain activity in real time, like how engaged is the brain? How hard is it working? Which parts are talking to each other?
So you can gauge cognitive engagement, cognitive load, that kind of thing. A window into neural activation.
Precisely. But that wasn't all. They threw a lot at this.
What else?
They used natural language processing, NLP, to really dig into the essays the participants wrote.
Analyzing the text itself. Okay.
How? Things like named entity recognition spotting specific facts or names, engrams looking for common phrases, ontology analysis mapping the concepts, even latent space embeddings.
Wow. Okay. So deep linguistic analysis.
Yeah, getting at the structure and content in a really detailed way. Plus, they did post-session interviews,
Talking to the participants about their experience, qualitative data,
asking about, how they felt. Did they feel they owned the essay? Was it satisfying?
subjective experience, important content.
And get this, the essays were scored by both experienced human teachers and a specially built AI judge.
Ooh, that's interesting. Comparing human versus AI evaluation of the output.
Right, so it was this really multifaceted approach, trying to capture everything: objective brain data, linguistic patterns, subjective feelings, and evaluation quality.
Very comprehensive. Sounds like a solid design.
So the structure started with 3 main sessions that a really critical fourth one we'll get to.
Okay. Sessions 1, 2, 3. What happened there?
Participants were split into 3 groups. All had to write essays based on classic SAT-style prompts.
Ah, those broad, argumentative topics like loyalty, happiness.
Choices, forethought, art, courage, perfection, enthusiasm, that kind of thing. Broad themes.
Designed to make you think, yeah.
They got 3 options per session, had to pick one, and crucially, only 20 minutes to write each essay.
Okay, so consistent pressure, consistent time frame, fair comparison. What were the 3 groups?
Group 1 was the LLM group. Strict rules here.
Yeah.
They could only use OpenAI's GPT-4o, nothing else.
No Google, no other tabs, just the LLM isolating its effect.
Exactly. Group 2 was the search engine group. They could use any website except LLMs.
So traditional online research, Google, Wikipedia, whatever.
Right. They mostly use Google. And the researchers even had them add AI to searches to try and filter out AI-generated answers from the search results themselves.
Smart control, differentiating search from pure generation.
And finally, Group 3, the brain-only group. No online tools, no LLMs, just their own knowledge.
Purely internal resources, the baseline, how the brain works unaided on this task.
This setup was key, right? Because it meant any differences they saw in the essays and the brain activity could be pretty reliably linked back to the specific tool or lack thereof.
Absolutely. That kind of rigorous control is what gives the findings weight. It isolates the variable of interest, the tool use.
Okay, so that sets the scene for the first 3 sessions.
Yeah.
But session 4, that's where, as they say, the plot thickens.
Ah, the pivotal twist you mentioned. What happened in session 4?
This is where it gets really interesting for that apprenticeship idea.
Yeah.
Only 18 participants came back, a smaller group.
Okay, focus group.
But here's the kicker. They were reassigned to the opposite group from their first 3 sessions.
Whoa. Okay, so if you used the LLM before.
Now you were in the LLM to brain group. Forced to write using only your brain. No tools allowed. Suddenly the crutch is gone.
Testing what happens after relying on the AI. The cognitive debt test, in a way.
Exactly. And conversely, if you were originally in the brain-only group.
You became the brain to LLM group. Introduced to the LLM for the first time in session 4.
Right. So they could see how someone with that pre-built cognitive foundation integrated this powerful new tool.
Fascinating comparison. And did the participants know about this switch?
Nope. That's another clever part. They weren't told about the reassignment beforehand. They were genuinely surprised.
And the prompts?
They were given personalized prompts based on topics they'd already written about in earlier sessions, but maybe with a slightly different angle.
So it tapped into knowledge they should have already processed. Testing, retention, and adaptation.
Yeah, it created this really powerful, almost raw test of learning, adaptation, how those foundational skills affect tool adoption. You see the immediate impact of that switch.
Brilliant design. Really gets at the core questions.
And remember those post-assessment interviews? They were crucial again in session 4.
Digging into how they felt about the switch, their performance.
Yeah, questions about topic choice, structure, quoting ability again, ownership, satisfaction, getting that subjective layer.
Giving voice to the numbers, yeah.
And tying it back to the brain. The EEG data was analyzed using some advanced techniques. You mentioned DDTF.
Right, dynamic directed transfer function, DDTF. It's a way to look not just at if brain regions are active, but how information is flowing between them, the direction and strength of the connections.
Okay, so it's about the communication network.
Exactly. And combined with all that NLP analysis, the named entities, the enneagrams, the ontology mapping, the semantic similarity, it gave this incredibly rich picture.
Like seeing the brain's activity and the linguistic output side by side.
Precisely. It lets you connect the dots between the internal cognitive process and the external product, the essay, a much deeper understanding than just looking at one or the other.
Okay, so with that incredible setup laid out, let's dive into what they actually found, starting with those first 3 sessions, the baseline responses.
Right, the initial snapshots. And some of the behavioral stuff was, well, pretty eye-opening right away. Let's talk about quoting ability.
Yeah, this one jumped out at me. It seems so basic, quoting your own work.
You'd think so. But in session 1, for the LLM group, an astonishing 83.3%, that's 15 out of 18 people,
83% failed. Failed to do what exactly?
failed to provide a correct quotation from the essay they had just written, sometimes with the LLM's help.
Wow, okay. Compared to the other groups.
Only 11.1%, just 2 out of 18, had similar trouble in both the search engine and brain-only groups. A huge difference.
And it wasn't just trouble, was it? It was worse than that for the LLM group.
It was. Get this. In session 1, 0 participants in the LLM group could provide a correct quote. None.
0. That's stark.
Stark is the word. And this difficulty persisted, maybe lessened slightly, but it was still there in sessions 2 and 3 for them.
While the others, search engine and brain only?
They were consistently strong. They actually improved, getting near perfect quoting accuracy by session 3.
So the takeaway is pretty clear there.
Crystal clear. Relying heavily on the LLM seemed to substantially impair their ability to accurately recall and quote their own text. The other methods were significantly better.
It's more than a red flag, like you said earlier. It's like a giant flashing sign about encoding information.
If you can't even pull out a sentence you just worked on, how deeply did you really process it? How well is it encoded for future use or building upon? It raises serious questions.
Absolutely. Okay, what about essay ownership? That feeling of, I wrote this?
That was more nuanced, but still revealing. In session 1, the LLM group's sense of ownership was kind of fragmented.
Fragmented how?
Well, some claimed full ownership, sure, but a noticeable number 3 out of 18 explicitly said they felt no ownership at all.
Wow, none at all.
Or they gave partial credit, like 50-50 or 70% me, 30% the AI, like co-author.
Okay, compared to the search engine group.
They had no reports of 0 ownership, but maybe slightly less full ownership compared to the brain-only folks.
And the brain-only group, the ones writing totally from scratch.
Overwhelmingly claimed full ownership. 16 out of 18 in session 1, and it climbed to all 18 by session 3.
And they felt it was personal.
Yeah, they made comments like, the essays felt very personal because it was about my own experiences. There's a connection there.
So the implication seems to be
That when the tool does too much of the heavy lifting, that sense of personal contribution, that mental investment, it can really drop off. That psychological link to your own work weakens.
makes sense. Okay, but were they satisfied with the essays? Maybe the LLM group felt less ownership but thought the essays were great.
That's the interesting paradox. Satisfaction was actually pretty high across the board mostly.
Oh, even for the LLM group.
Well, the search engine group was fully satisfied 18 out of 18 every session. Consistent.
Okay.
The LLM and brain-only groups had a bit more variation, but most participants in all groups said they were satisfied.
So high satisfaction doesn't tell the whole story then.
Not necessarily. High satisfaction for an LLM user might not mean deep learning or strong ownership occurred. The interviews gave hints.
What kind of hints?
Some LLM users said they felt tired this time compared to last time because the LLM generated these long, complex sentences that were hard to even memorize, let alone internalize.
Suggests passive reception, not active creation.
Right. Others felt the output was overly robotic, and they had to work hard just to make it sound like them.
So satisfaction might include relief that it's done or looks polished, but not deep engagement.
Exactly. And some even felt guilty using ChatGPT for revisions. So satisfaction is complex. It doesn't automatically mean it was a good learning experience.
Got it. Okay, let's shift from behavior to the brain itself.
Yeah.
The neural connectivity findings from sessions 1 through. This is where we see the unseen costs, right?
This is where the EEG data really starts painting a picture. And it was remarkably consistent. brain connectivity systematically decreased as the amount of external tool support increased.
So the more help you got from the tool.
The less connected in certain ways your brain activity seemed to be.
Let's break that down. The brain-only group, the ones doing it all themselves.
They showed the strongest and widest ranging neural networks. Think of their brains firing on all cylinders, building expensive connections.
Especially in which brainwaves?
We saw this particularly in alpha, theta, and delta bands. Briefly, alpha is often linked to internal focus, semantic processing, creative ideas, theta with deeper processing, memory, monitoring your work, delta with really deep cognitive integration.
And they had more connections in these bands.
Significantly more. Just in alpha, for example, the brain-only group had 79 significant connections versus only 42 for the LLM group. Big difference. Similar gaps in delta and theta, too.
So their brains were really buzzing with internal activity, building meaning from within.
That's exactly what it looks like. A robust, internally driven cognitive process. Now, the search engine group.
They were in the middle.
Sort of intermediate engagement, yeah. Their EEG showed some unique beta activity.
Beta waves, what's that associated with?
Often with active attention, visual processing, motor activity, which makes sense. They were scrolling, reading websites, actively searching.
Okay, but less alpha and theta than the brain-only group.
Yes, lower connectivity in those bands compared to brain-only. This might reflect less reliance on purely internal memory.
Because the information was readily available online.
Potentially. It aligns with the Google effect idea. If you know you can easily look something up, maybe your brain doesn't work quite as hard to deeply encode it internally. It externalized some memory load.
Okay, makes sense. And the LLM group.
Yeah.
The ones getting the most external help.
They showed the weakest overall coupling in their brain networks. Significantly reduced connectivity up to 55% lower magnitude compared to brain-only in those crucial low-frequency networks for semantics and monitoring.
So much less internal network building. What was their brain activity focused on instead?
It seemed to shift more towards procedural integration, like figuring out how to prompt the AI, and basic motor coordination, like typing. Interestingly, less visual cortex activation than the search engine group, too.
Less visual, even though they're looking at a screen.
Perhaps because they weren't actively scanning and evaluating multiple sources like the search group was. Maybe more passively receiving generated text.
So the big picture from the EEG.
The brain adapts profoundly. When you rely on internal resources, you build broad, robust internal networks. When you lean heavily on external tools, especially powerful ones like LLMs, the brain offloads that work.
It becomes more efficient in a way.
It finds the efficient path, yes. But the critical question this study raises is whether that efficiency, achieved by outsourcing core cognitive tasks, comes at the cost of building those internal cognitive structures long term.
Like a muscle that doesn't get worked. Okay. Let's dig even deeper now, using the NLP insights. How did the tools themselves shape the thinking, as reflected in the language?
Right, looking at the essays themselves. And one major finding was this homogenization effect with LLMs.
Homogenization.
Yeah.
Meaning the essays became more similar.
Exactly. The LLM group produced essays that were, statistically speaking, much more alike within each topic, significantly less deviation compared to the other groups.
While the brain-only group
Showed strong variability, lots of different approaches, unique angles, much more diverse.
How did they see this homogeneity in the language itself?
Through enneagram analysis, those word sequences, the linguistic fingerprints, the LLM essays kept reusing the same kind of generic boilerplate phrases.
Like what? Give me an example.
Things like perfect society, choose career, person success, very standard stuff. And they tended to use the third person a lot, making it sound more formal, maybe a bit detached.
Whereas the brain-only essays?
Much more diverse engrams. You saw unique phrases reflecting individual thought, like multiple choice or true happy or think twice. It showed more personal processing.
So it wasn't just style, it was the substance underneath.
It points that way. One of the human teachers in the study nailed it. She said the LLM essays, though often long, had standard ideas, reoccurring typical formulations, making the AI use rather obvious.
And she felt they lacked something.
Yeah, she said many sentences were empty with regard to content and essays lacked personal nuances. A kind of surface-level perfection without depth or originality.
So the AI produces grammatically correct, seemingly complete text, but it misses that human spark, that unique perspective.
That's what the data suggests. Now let's look at the specific content. They used named entity recognition, NER.
To find specific facts, names, places, dates.
Right. And interestingly, the LLM group actually used the most of these specific named entities.
More than the search group. More than the brain-only group.
Over twice as many as the search engine group, and about 60% more than the brain-only group.
Huh. So on the surface, that sounds like the LLM essays were richer, more detailed.
You might think so initially, but the ontology analysis told a different story.
Ontology analysis. Remind me what that does.
It maps the underlying concepts and how they relate to each other in the text. The conceptual structure.
Okay. And what did that show?
It showed that the LLM and search engine groups had essays with significant correlation in their ontologies. They tended to focus on similar conceptual spaces.
Like what?
For example, on societal topics, they might both focus heavily on justice aspects. On art, they might lean towards objective art. Very similar conceptual frameworks.
But the brain-only group.
Their ontologies had no significant intersections with either of the other groups. They explored different conceptual territory, things like freedom, liberty, or subjective views of art, much more diverse thinking.
So what does that suggest about the LLMs and search engines?
It suggests LLMs might be propagating the dominant perspectives or biases present in their massive training data, and search engines might steer users towards highly ranked, possibly commercially influenced content.
Creating these echo chambers or filter bubbles.
Potentially, yeah. Limiting exposure to diverse viewpoints, reinforcing certain ways of thinking, maybe unintentionally narrowing the scope of inquiry.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
And the judges. Human teachers versus the AI judge. What was the verdict there?
This was fascinating. The human teachers who have experience spotting AI writing,
I could tell.
they consistently gave lower scores, especially to the LLM group essays, specifically on metrics like uniqueness and content structure.
They recognized that soulless perfection, perhaps.
They identified a distinctive writing style associated with the LLM group. Yeah, something felt off, less authentic.
But the AI judge, the one built for the study.
It consistently scored essays higher on those same metrics. Uniqueness, quality, it completely missed the AI's stylistic fingerprint.
Wow. The AI judge couldn't recognize the AI writing.
And it couldn't recognize the individual participant's own style either. It rewarded the polished, generic output.
That raises a huge question, doesn't it?
Yeah, a profound one. If even sophisticated AI judges can't tell the difference, how do students learn to develop their own voice? How do they learn critical evaluation? How do we handle issues of academic integrity?
If the tool's designed to evaluate reward, the very thing we're trying to teach, beyond that generic perfection.
It creates a problematic feedback loop. It could inadvertently encourage homogeneity over genuine, messy, individual thought and expression.
Okay, this is all building towards the crucial part.
Yeah.
Session 4, the apprenticeship challenge. This really brings the cognitive debt idea into sharp focus, especially for that first group.
Yes, the LLM to brain group. These are the folks who used the LLM for 3 sessions, got accustomed to it.
And a bam, tool taken away, right? Using only your brain.
And the fallout, behaviorally, was pretty stark. Remember the quoting task?
How did they do in session 4 without the LLM they'd relied on?
It was bad. 78% of them couldn't quote anything correctly from their own prior essays, and only 11% could produce any correct quote at all.
78% failed,
Yeah.
compared to the other group in session 4.
Compared to the brain-only group, who were now using the LLM for the first time, but we're talking about their previous unaided work, where 78% could correctly quote from their earlier essays. A massive, significant difference.
So relying on the LLM seemed to actively hinder their ability to recall their own work later.
It strongly suggests that. And critically, this wasn't just a memory blip. It showed up in their brain activity, too.
This is the neural evidence for cognitive debt.
This is where it gets really compelling, yes. The DDTF analysis, looking at information flow,
What did it show for this LLM to brain group when they tried to write unaided?
it showed they lacked the robust frontoparietal synchronization.
Okay, break that down. Frontoparietal.
Think of it as the connection, the teamwork, between the front of the brain, executive functions, planning, decision-making, and the backside parts, integrating information, memory access. That crucial link was weaker.
They weren't making those connections as strongly.
They showed no high-significance connectivity clusters. Their neural communication during retrieval seemed attenuated. Basically, the brain networks weren't firing together as effectively when they had to rely solely on internal resources.
Wow. So the reliance on the tools seemed to prevent the strengthening of those internal pathways.
That's the strong implication. Early AI reliance might lead to shallow encoding because the demanding cognitive work, organizing, synthesizing, retrieving was outsourced to the LLM.
They skipped developing their own organizational strategies.
Exactly. And that led directly to underperformance when the AI support was removed. It's like a muscle that wasn't exercise skill atrophy.
And did it affect the content of their unaided writing in session 4?
It seemed to. The study noted they repeatedly focused on a narrower set of ideas.
They got stuck.
And they often reused the same n-grams, the same phrases from their previous LLM-assisted sessions, like the phrase before speaking for the forethought topic or perfect society for the perfect topic.
Almost like the AI's suggestions had become ingrained, limiting their own ideation.
That's what it looks like. This pattern is a clear reflection of that cognitive debt accumulating. Relying on the external system replaced the effort needed for independent thinking and original idea generation.
And the study warns about long-term costs.
Yes, potentially diminished critical inquiry, maybe being more easily swayed by information because you haven't developed deep processing skills, and possibly decreased creativity. The brain adapts to offloading work if we let it.
Okay, that's a sobering picture of the untrained apprentice. But then there's the other side of session 4.
The flip side, yes, the brain to LLM group.
These are the people who spent 3 sessions building their cognitive muscles, writing unaided. Then they got the LLM, the master craftsman approach.
And their brains reacted very differently when they first encountered the LLM in session 4.
How so? Did the brain activity decrease like the original LLM group?
Quite the opposite. They showed a network-wide spike in connectivity across multiple frequency bands, alpha, beta, theta, delta.
A spike. Their brains got more active when introduced to the LLM.
Significantly more active, yes. Much higher connectivity than the initial LLM group showed in their first sessions using the tool.
Wow. Why would that happen? What does that suggest?
It suggests that encountering the LLM after building their own strong internal knowledge base and thinking strategies, it forced their brains to work harder. In a good way.
Harder how?
They had to actively reconcile internally stored plans with external prompts. They were comparing, contrasting, integrating. It actually increased attentional demand and integration overhead.
So they weren't just passively accepting the AI's output.
And not at all. They were actively engaging with it, wrestling with it, fitting it into their own mental framework.
That sounds like much more strategic use.
Exactly. Their better memory recall and the activation of widespread neural networks suggest they could leverage the LLM strategically. They were doing self-reflection and elaborative rehearsal.
Using the tool to refine and extend their own thinking, not replace it.
Precisely. They weren't just users, they were conductors, orchestrating the process using the tool as one instrument.
And the interview supported this difference. What did these participants say?
Yes, the contrast was clear. Remember the LLM to brain person who said their unaided essay in session 4 felt better in terms of detail, even if the ChatGPT one was more complete.
Right, they recognized the loss of depth.
But for the brain to LLM group, after using the AI for the first time, one participant said they was able to add more and elaborate more of my ideas and thoughts.
Using it as an amplifier.
Exactly. It's powerful evidence for the value of building that cognitive foundation first. When the core skills are there, LLMs can become potent amplifiers, not just substitutes.
Okay, so tying this all together, the study really hammers home the danger, doesn't it? Handing that sophisticated tool to someone before they've had the mentorship, the foundational training.
The LLM to brain group is the cautionary tale, writ large in brain data and behavioral outcomes. Early reliance without the basics leads to shallow encoding, cognitive debt, and trouble functioning independently later.
And that fear of cognitive debt.
It seems primarily realized in that educational vacuum we talked about, where tools are given out without the crucial step of building the user's internal capacity first.
The study provides the neurological basis for why that vacuum is so risky.
Consistently, compellingly.
So the path forward isn't banning the tools. LLMs aren't going away.
Absolutely not. Trying to ban them is futile and probably counterproductive. The study is really a clarion call to develop the pedagogy, the teaching methods.
The modern apprenticeship.
Exactly. Embracing what we call the brain-first principle. Meaning we must intentionally, deliberately teach the fundamentals of critical thinking, analytical reading, and effective writing first. Build that cognitive architecture for independent reasoning, the kind of robust internal networks we saw in the brain-only group.
Get the foundation strong. Build the mental house.
Right. And then, once those cognitive muscles are developed and strong, then we introduce the powerful cognitive engine of the LLM.
But with guidance.
Crucially, with guidance. Showing students how to use it strategically for brainstorming, for efficiency, for refining their ideas. Not as a shortcut that bypasses learning.
Like the Brain to LLM group demonstrated.
Hmm.
Strong foundation plus tool, enhanced capability, even increased brain activity.
That's the model. It's not if we use LLMs, it's how and critically when we integrate them to maximize human potential, not diminish it.
It becomes about building this hybrid strategy.
That seems to be the most promising approach. Let AI handle some routine stuff, perhaps. But the core cognitive work, idea generation, structuring complex thoughts, critical evaluation, adding that personal insight that has to remain human-driven.
Especially in the early stages of learning.
Definitely. Early learning needs that full neural engagement to build the networks. Later, once the skills are solid, maybe selective AI support can help reduce unnecessary load without undermining the foundation.
So when we reframe this whole thing, away from just risk,
Towards craftsmanship, cultivation.
the debate changes entirely. It's not how do we restrict this, but how do we cultivate master craftsmen for the digital age.
Ready to build the future with these tools, using them wisely and powerfully, training our brains to be the masters of the cognitive engines.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into your brain on ChatGPT, the implications feel pretty profound.
They really are.
LLMs are amazing tools, undeniably powerful, but using them well, beneficially, it demands we rethink our educational approaches quite fundamentally.
The data gives us that neurophysiological grounding for why independent thought and foundational skills are just paramount. They aren't optional extras.
And it's not about rejecting technology, it's about mastery.
Informed, intentional use, knowing how you're using the tool and what effect it's having, because the brain will adapt.
And if we let the AI do all the heavy lifting cognitively,
Our brains might optimize for that offloading. And without that foundational training, without the apprenticeship, that could lead to real cognitive deficiency when independent thought is needed.
the study also hinted at some broader concerns, didn't it? Beyond the individual brain.
It did. Briefly touched on the potential for LMs to create new kinds of echo chambers,
Not just user choice, but baked into the models.
driven potentially by shareholder priorities or the commercial interests behind the models, rather than a pure, unbiased presentation of information. A more subtle, pervasive filter bubble, perhaps.
Something to be critically aware of. And there was a practical cost, too.
Yes, the energy cost. Often overlooked. An LLM query uses roughly 10 times more energy than a typical search query.
10 times. Wow.
About 0.3 watt hours versus 0.03. Scale that up globally. Billions of queries. It's a significant environmental footprint.
So we need to ask if the convenience is always worth that material cost. Are we using them judiciously?
It's a valid question. And then there's the ethical or perhaps psychological angle from the interviews.
The brain-only group felt more satisfied and connected.
Consistently reported higher satisfaction, more value, more ownership compared to the LLM users. It highlights that human element, that sense of accomplishment from genuine effort, which sometimes gets lost when we chase pure efficiency.
So as these cognitive engines weave themselves deeper into our lives, the responsibility really falls on us, doesn't it?
As learners, as educators, as creators,
To make sure we're not just passive users, but true craftsmen, wielding these tools with skill, with judgment, with independent thought.
it comes down to choices.
So the final thought for you listening: how you choose to train your cognitive engine, and what kind of future will that choice help build?
It's a vital question. And of course, there's always more to learn. We need more research, especially longitudinal studies, to see the long-term effects. But for now, the message from this study seems pretty clear. Build the foundation first. Foster independent thinking. Then integrate the tools strategically. That's how we become the master craftsmen of this new age. Critical thinking is key.